I'm going to share the classic version that we've probably all heard, but then I'm going to share the origins because the truth of it is actually a lot more terrifying than the fairy tale. People were so destroyed by hunger that they extracted bodies of the dead from cemeteries, removed the flesh from skulls, and ate it. This chaos resulted in the origin tale of Hansel and Gretel. According to the Grimm brothers, when times are tough, witches live in gingerbread houses, lure children with baked goods to fatten them up for the slaughter. But there's another story written in the 1960s that frames this tale another way. It's about a woman who lived in Germany in the early 1600s and who was legendary for her gingerbread cookies. It all depends on who you're listening to, so be careful who you're believing. So this story was written as a fairy tale by the Grimm brothers in 1812. And it's a story of two poor children of a woodcutter. And in Europe in 1314, a great famine struck. And the stepmother of these children decided that in order for her and her husband not to starve, that the children needed to be sacrificed, which was, I didn't realize about the story that this is why the kids were in the woods in the first place, but this is why the kids were in the woods, okay? So these kids overhear the story or the plan of their stepmother the night before, and Hansel sneaks out and gathers some pebbles so he and his sister can find their way home when their stepmother takes them out and tries to trick them with her evil plan. So the next day, the whole family walks out deep into the woods, and Hansel places his pebbles. And pretty soon the kids are kind of out there deep in the woods, and they realize that their parents have abandoned them. But they use those pebbles and they find their way back home. And when they get there, their father is full of regret. He brings them back in. And for a little while, things go on that way where they're starving. But as the famine continues to get worse, the stepmother insists that they take the kids back into the forest and leave them to fend for themselves. And this is pretty common of this time for this particular situation, but I'm going to explain that afterwards. This time, since they had found their way home last time, she locks them in their room overnight so they can't get out and devise any way of finding their way back home. But Hansel he grabs a little thing of bread, and he's able to leave breadcrumbs on his way to try to find his way back home. But unfortunately, breadcrumbs are food, and the birds eat them, and they're gone. So the kids search for a very long time, and then they come upon a house that's made of gingerbread cake and sugary frosting and whatever, yummy treats a kid would like to enjoy, especially hungry ones. So while they're eating, this haggardly woman comes out, but is very nice and invites them inside, offers them a meal, and pretends to be kind. And so after she feeds them, lures them in, she traps them and keeps them there, but keeps feeding them these sweets to fatten them up. And then one day, the murderous witch, of course, decides her meal is ready. She takes the little girl Gretel, lights the oven, because it's time to prepare her brother for eating, which is really dark. Like, remember hearing this as a child? Not really asking too many questions about it. That's pretty dark. Gretel realizes, she knows what's going on. Like, she needs to figure something out because the witch is trying to get her to step into the oven to check the temperature. So Gretel plays dumb. The witch gets really angry and goes to demonstrate, which is when Gretel pushes the witch into the oven, slams the door shut, and lets the ungodly creature to be burned to ashes. So after that, Gretel frees Hansel, and apparently this witch had a bunch of treasure, and they gathered it all up and they head home. And their dad they're filled with grief. Their stepmother had passed away because she's a monster, and he accepts them back in, with open arms, and they live happily ever after with the witch's wealth. Okay. But the families of this famine in Europe in the 1300s did not live happily ever after. The results for them were a little more devastating because they didn't have any of these magic riches. Over 30 million people actually starved to death, which was about more than 25% of like certain populations in certain areas. The process was even worse for elderly people who chose to voluntarily starve to death to allow the young to live. Other families committed infanticide or abandoned their children altogether and let them fend for themselves. It's believed that mothers were fed to their children during a famine this extreme. So it's a lot darker than these kids stumbled upon this witch and she's this lone, scary figure. People were so destroyed by hunger that they extracted bodies of the dead from cemeteries, removed the flesh from skulls, and ate it when women ate their own children. This chaos resulted in the origin tale of Hansel and Gretel. So according to the Grimm brothers, when times are tough, witches live in gingerbread houses, lure children with baked goods to fatten them up for the slaughter. But there's another story written in the 1960s that frames this tale another way. It's about a woman who lived in Germany in the early 1600s and who was legendary for her gingerbread cookies. She started off by baking them for church events, but everybody loved them so much that she started to sell them at fairs and markets. And it was at one of those fairs that Katharina caught the attention of Hans, a rival baker who was envious of her profitable business. At first, he tried to pursue Katarina's affections in order to steal her recipe, but she turned him down when she discovered his true motive. Wanting to escape Hans's determined harassment, she moved away, taking her baking business with her. And she continued to be prosperous and gain recognition. But unfortunately, this enraged Hans, who formally accused her of being a witch in a court, hoping to gain access to her confiscated property, including a particular recipe. Katarina was arrested and tortured, ultimately released because there was no evidence. And the court let her go and they released her back into her home in the woods to live in peace. But then, in an awful twist, Hans and his sister Greet broke into her house, murdered her, and burned her in her own baking oven. While Hans and Greet did get arrested, they were eventually set free. Hans lived the rest of his life as a prosperous and influential citizen with a very familiar but not quite perfect gingerbread recipe. And when the story was retold, they became the innocent children, while Katarina became the monstrous witch of our nightmares. And that's my story.
Hello, my darlings, and welcome back.
This month, I'll let the energy help me to prioritize my projects and goals so that I don't have to work so damn hard to figure it all out. Welcome to Moonlit Magic. We're going to unlock each of the major moon phases as we move through this. Meet me back here every week to freshen up the energy and remind ourselves what our intentions for this month are all about. This breaks down into 4 installments. There are different ways to connect with our body than maybe we are traditionally familiar with. That helps us balance and create equilibrium between what is physical and what is spiritual inside of us.
This is my altar cloth, the one that I designed that is like an introduction to doing your own oracle reading.
That bring us out of our chaotic, anxious minds that are making up stories that aren't giving us credit for who we are, how much we've grown, and our full potential.